Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this evening's special council meeting. Welcome councillors, staff, those in the gallery, and our special guests this evening who will be making a delegation. We will call the meeting to order and note the members present. We will begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathering on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. We would like to recognize that we are in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory, and the land on which we are gathered today is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. Specifically, we acknowledge the neighboring community of Mishpahant First Nation, for whom we have great respect. We also recognize the contributions of all Indigenous peoples, including the Métis, in shaping and strengthening the community and province of Ontario. Thank you, and Miigwech. Item number 2, disclosure of pecuniary interest. Hearing and seeing none, we will move on to item number 3, approval of the agenda.
Moved by Councillor Hoffman, seconded by Councillor Cannon. Resolved that the agenda for the special meeting of council scheduled for Wednesday, January 24th, 2024 be approved as presented.
All in favor? Carried. Item number 4, delegations and presentations. We do have one this evening. Item 4.1, Mr. Terry Gervais, Fire Service Executive, the Lumex Group, Fire Service Review. Terry, the floor is yours. I'll ask you to just hold until Maury gets the presentation up, and please turn on your microphone and begin the presentation when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight the Fire Services Review. As Council knows, in 2023, the municipality contracted us through an RFP process to conduct your Fire Services Review. And the Fire Services Review project had the following goals: access the fire protection services in Wawa, provide data for decisions about safety for residents, businesses, and visitors, and provide cost-effective strategies to address current and anticipated needs in the fire protection. And Council, I'd like to let Council know that this truly is meant to be a strategic plan for you. As we work through the recommendations, and we're going to talk about the numbers and the type of recommendations that are in there, what we want to remember is that this doesn't have to be done overnight. We've put some strategic kind of guidelines in there when we think you should do them, but it really truly is meant to be a vision for you. So as you keep working forward, and the chief works forward with the CEO, kind of this to work on some of the recommendations and complete them. So I got to tell you that this was a great experience for myself and our team. The CAO and her team, and the fire chief and his team were all very engaged and very positive through this whole process. Right from the very beginning, they knew they were doing a review that opened the doors up to not only the Lumex Group, but like tonight, it opens it up to the public. So even with that, they knew that this was really important for the community and really, really important for council to hear. So I want to thank them for that, and thank. In addition, we work with the Fire Advisory Committee, and again, they brought tremendous insight to the process. They helped us guide us through the whole way. We did presentations to them on a monthly basis and solicited their feedback as community members and as representatives for council. Next slide, please. So just a reminder from when we first kind of presented what the Fire Service Review is about. First off, we want to make sure you're legislative compliant with the Fire Protection and Prevention Act and any other applicable legislation. It will provide recommendations on public education, code enforcement, and fire suppression, which are the 3 lines of defense for life safety for your community. It provides council with information to make decisions about protecting lives and property in your community. It should provide a clear picture for your community's, your current emergency services needs and what you can anticipate in the future, and provides the department with a strategic plan that is within WAWA's means to implement. And that's very important, as council knows. The approach and methodology, we did the startup meeting, of course, and then we did the stakeholder engagement sessions, right from the fire committee to the CEO, the fire chief, the deputy chief we met with, the firefighters, we did engagement sessions with them, including some one-on-ones. We met with the applicable municipal staff, and we did a public survey that we'll talk about as we get through. We gathered a tremendous amount of data, like I talked about when we did the community risk assessment. The chief provided us a tremendous amount of data that we could analyze and look at kind of where you are today and where you need to go in the future. We developed a draft report, and we presented the draft report to the Fire Services Committee. We presented it to the CAO and to the chief, and then out of that we made whatever corrections or tailoring, and then tonight you have the final report going. So recommendations. So you'll see that there's a total of 46 recommendations in our fire service review. And one of the things that I want to, so council understands is not to get worried about the number of recommendations. That doesn't mean that your fire service isn't doing a good job, because it is doing a great job. So some of the recommendations, a lot of them are administrative. So how do we clean up bylaws and agreements and policies and procedures? So a lot of it has to do with kind of the documentation and the paperwork side. Out of those recommendations, there really is 3 partners in this. There's the municipal staff, there's the department, but council also is part of the partnership. So together, working together, that's how you're going to manage the recommendations, as the chief keeps bringing them forward. The recommendations, this report is not meant to be passed and adopted by council, that all these recommendations are going through tonight. This is your strategic plan. It doesn't supersede any of your procurement bylaws or any other procedures you have. So when the chief, but it gives him that guide to come back to council and say, as per the fire services review, this is what we talked about, and this is the direction that we'd like to go. You'll see in the summary recommendations, we talked about things about kind of when they should be addressed, and they're a guide for you. Some of them may move up, or some of them may slide later. We put in there whether it should be a budget item, could be a positive budget item, or it could be not a negative. I don't want to say negative, but a cost money into the budget process. Whether council needs to approve the recommendation or not, and is it a recommended, mandatory, or a compliance? The other thing with the recommendations and with that approval, we want to make clear that some of the recommendations are policy driven, which is the responsibility of council, and some of them are operational decisions or recommendations, which is the responsibility of your fire chief and his team. So this is just the breakdown. I won't spend a lot of time on this because we're going to kind of go through these, but this is the breakdown of where the number of recommendations are following each section. So you'll see in sections, occupational health and safety, training, the fire station, are all kind of 8 and 9 recommendations. Some of them are administrative, like we talked about, and they're probably the 3 areas, plus the fire chief's duties and workload and succession planning is where I want to concentrate a little bit tonight. We will go through them all, but they're the ones I'll spend the most time on. One thing I encourage council is to if they haven't read the entire document, is to read the history of the fire department. It was a great. I had a wonderful time with former deputy chief, listening to him for an afternoon and talking about how proud he was of the fire department, how it started, and before the highway was open. And a small little story told me about the fire hall was the first place to have a color TV in the community, and Saturday nights they would go and get together with their family and watch the hockey night in Canada. So but it's you need to know how to get the future. You need to know where you were in the past too. So it was a great afternoon, and I thank the deputy chief for that. So the other thing that I want to talk about before we kind of get into the recommendations is, I said that we need to know whether you're compliant for the FPPA up front, and I got to tell you, you are compliant by the FPPA for your legislative standards. So in that, there's a number of standards that you have to do. One is establish a fire department. Next one's have public education programs, appoint a fire chief, have a CO smoke detector program, have a vulnerable occupancy program, inspections upon complaint, inspections upon request, and community risk assessment. And you have a yes on every one of those charts, and that chart's on page 27. So that's kudos to the municipality, to the department, and of course to the fire chief. What the recommendations, a lot of them we'll talk to, especially within the fire prevention section, is how do you increase that? How do you get from that reactive to the proactive in life safety for your community? So bylaws, I won't spend a lot of time telling council how important bylaws are. That's your bread and butter. So you know how important bylaws are. You know that there's a number of fire protection bylaws that you have. You know, in their fireworks bylaw, you have your open air burning. You know, just to name a couple. The biggest bylaw that affects the department is the establishing and regulating bylaw. So your current bylaw was done in 1996, and the ENR bylaw, the establishing regulating bylaw, is the guide for the department. It's council's guide to say this is the level of service that we want to provide to the community. So the ENR bylaw from 1996, when you look at some of the components of the bylaw, does need to be updated to reflect more what you're doing today. You know, the org structure that's there in 96 is different than what it is in 2024. The ENR bylaw, you know, it's that partnership. Your job is to say, this is the level of service we're going to set for for the community. The department's job is to follow that level of service. But then the partnership is that council's got to support that level of service, whether it's financially by it's allowing the chief to pass bylaws or buy equipment or whatever the policy or whatever the case might be. So the ENR bylaws is a very important component. Out of all the bylaws, it's one of the drivers, excuse me. So we have a number of recommendations in the bylaw section. The first one is the fire chief should update the establishing regulated bylaw to reflect the department's current operations and level of service. Bring it back to council. It is your role to pass it, consider it and adopt it, is what we said. So bring it up to where it is today. You know, make sure the org structure is right. Make sure it's your level of service that you're providing today. The number two is the fire chief should complete an annual review of the Wawa's establishing regulated bylaw to verify that it remains current with all services in the department. As an ex-fire chief, I can tell how easy it is. All of a sudden something happens, we make a change in the department, but we don't think about it, just come back to council and say, hey, we should change the ENR bylaw. And it might even be something that council approved. We just didn't follow through with the last part. So not uncommon. Every fire department I ever went to, the first thing I did was put a new ENR bylaw in place. So number three is the fire chief should review all the fire services bylaws in Wawa and update them to ensure they're current and applicable. And the fire chief should then present the updated versions to council for their consideration and adoption. And number four is to establish a schedule on reviewing the bylaws. So make a schedule. So every year you look at a couple of them so that they remain current. You know, same as we're going to talk about agreements in a second, same as the agreements, making sure that they kind of remain current. Agreements. So under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, you know, the municipality is allowed to make certain types of agreements. There's mutual aid agreements, there's automatic aid agreements, and fire protection agreements. So the mutual aid agreements are agreements, it's a provincial mutual aid agreement so that you need support from one of your neighboring communities to fight a certain type of incident or come to a certain type of incident. And they provide whatever equipment or manpower that you ask for. It's usually on a reciprocating, you would go and help them as well. Automatic aid agreements are agreements where you do first response for another community, which you have some of them. And fire protection agreements are you agree to provide fire protection to another municipality or a private industry like you are doing with the OSB plan. Next slide, please. So under the agreements, it's pretty similar to what the bylaws. There's one agreement that needs to be updated, and that's the mutual aid agreement. Some things have changed over the last several years with the province on the mutual aid agreement. So what we're recommending is that the agreement get updated just to reflect the current changes that are in the province. And basically, it's a provincial mutual aid agreement now that any department anywhere in province can be asked to respond to a community to support them if the fire marshal's asked. Stakeholder engagement sessions. So like I said at the start, we did a number of them. Everybody again was forthcoming. Sometimes it's tough. You do some of these and there's crickets in the room. There was never any crickets. The department was very passionate, very honest, very open, and we asked them to be that way. The fire chief, we had lots of sessions with him. In fact, I made my little notice, made a big exclamation notes, lots. So we talked lots on Zoom, we talked lots on the phone, we talked lots when I was here as well. Your CEO clerk, which doesn't happen in every community, was very engaged in this process as well too, and participated in a lot of our engagement sessions, and I think that was really important as well. The deputy chief, we had one-on-one sessions with the deputy chief, the fire advisory committee, which we had on a monthly basis, and then the officer and the firefighters of the department. And again, we did some one-on-ones in those engagement sessions with the officers and firefighters. So we conducted a public survey for the community, and probably most of you know, we had 16 questions that we asked. We worked together, the three of us, on getting the questions. Some of the key ones were, have you had any previous interactions with the department? What's your general opinion of the department? The third bullet talks about what protection services do you think the department should offer, what it's important to you as a community. So a couple unique things happened in this survey, and this was the chief and the CEO's suggestion is we added some questions there about being a volunteer firefighter. And, why, would you be a volunteer firefighter, and kind of why not wouldn't you be? So what a tremendous question. And I got to tell you, we've actually added to all our public surveys now that we do with volunteer fire services. The other thing that you did was had a draw. So if you put your name in and you did the survey, there was a draw and 3 winners got prizes. So I think you got a tremendous result. I can't remember the exact numbers, 160 some, which, you think about in a community of any size, that's a lot. We do surveys where we get 10 or 30 or, so we consider that as a real success for a community. Over 93% of the surveyors responded indicated a positive or very positive experience with the department in the last 5 years. That speaks volumes. 93%. That speaks volumes for what the chief and his team is doing. This one is the one that shows kind of what was important to your community. So, obviously fire suppression was at the start, vehicle collision. What was really interesting, we don't see a lot of at this high, is the natural emergencies and disaster response. And I think that speaks a lot about your community, but it also says, about having your good emergency management program, because that's the expectations of the community. Smoke and seal alarms, fire prevention, participating in community events, fire inspections, code enforcement. Again, that next line was all pretty, so, they had suppression, and then they wanted to make sure that they're doing the prevention as well. Ice, water, and rescue in number 9, and number 10 was responding to other emergencies in other communities. So I think that's, they're great results from the public survey, and it really does tell you where your community is, kind of what their expectations is, or a sample of. So in the stakeholder engagement sessions, so when we did the firefighters, we looked at common themes, and you'll see some of them in the document. And we also done up a document that we provide the chief, so he can sit with the fire chief, the fire chief, the deputy chief, and the officers should review all the results from the engagement sessions and look at them and see if there's stuff there that can be incorporated into the strategic plan of the department. So remember, this is what we got what the public felt. This is what the firefighters felt or feel. So is there stuff that we can do to help that or make changes within the department? So, and again, good success, lots of people, and it was a very positive experience for their team member that was there. So health and safety, I'll spend a little bit of time on the health and safety. There's a number of components in the health and safety, and I'll kind of break them all down for council. So we looked at the Joint Health and Safety Committee, the personal protective equipment, or the ensemble that the firefighters have to wear, right from their bunker stuff to their gloves, their helmet, and their flash hoods, boots, fit testing that they have to do for their mask, the firefighter health and wellness programs, and an officer development program. We all know that health and safety, how important it is. It always has been. More and more, it's becoming even large, like more. There's a bigger awareness in a lot of some of these programs. It's also a part that everybody has a partnership in, right from the firefighter right up through to the mayor, and everybody in between has a ownership of making sure that your municipal staff, your firefighters, the fire chief are healthy and are protected under the Health and Safety Act. But even more important, in your community, they're community members. You know, it's different in some other communities. Their stuff is important. They're a firefighter, but they may live in another community. Your people are all in your community. They're all members of your community. So that's kind of important. Overall, there's a great culture for health and safety within the department, right from the firefighters up to the chief. So that's a good positive start. Because if there's not a culture of safety, that's where you got to kind of start. So one of the things though, when we looked at the requirements under the Health and Safety Act and what for a committee, and we found a few things that need to kind of to be addressed. So you do have a joint health and safety committee. So the fire services, because of the numbers, needs to have its own health and safety committee. They do have a link with the fire chief to the municipal one. There's no terms of reference. So again, that's an administrative thing that could be looked after. They do have to do required inspections, but we didn't find any regular documentation on required inspections. They have to do quarterly meetings. There's a notice board that needs to be up to date. The documentation process, as we all know, needs to be in everything we do now. And a complaint process is just really no formal. So a lot of this is administrative. They're being safe. They have the culture of being safe, but you got to do the paperwork that kind of comes along with it. Personal protective equipment, a good thing for you with the support of council. The chief's done a great job of making sure that your personal protective equipment is all certified. There is standards for the province, standards for North America, that you need to have. Your gear has to have a 10-year within the 10-year certification if you're doing firefighting. So that's important to have, and you do have that. One of the challenges we found when we looked is not having any spare gear. So what happens if your gear gets contaminated as a result of a call? Under the Health and Safety Act, you got to get it cleaned, and then it needs to be tested every year as well too. But when the gear goes out because of your location, it takes 5 days to turn that around because it's got to go out of your municipality. So without having spare gear, you've lost those numbers of firefighters. So if you went to a major incident on the highway or a major incident here, and you had 10 of your gear contaminated, that's 10 firefighters you've just lost from not having some spare gear. So you do have a washer, and the chief showed me yesterday the washer is installed. It's not in operational yet, but it's just about there, and there's some policies that are being developed around it. That's going to make a big difference, because now instead of 5 days, you're going to turn your gear around in 1 day. So that's going to really help. Still means you got to send it out to test, but for washing it, it's going to be. We need to develop some policies around contaminated gear in this day and age. You need to make sure that if it's contaminated, it doesn't go in the truck, it goes into bags, comes back, it's cleaned. And some of this has been developed because we've now know in the last number of years, we now know that the jobs that these guys are doing, or these people are doing, there's cancers attributed to some of the stuff they're doing. And that's why you have presumptive legislation. So you need to build in these processes to prevent cancer. And there's a financial cost to the municipality if your firefighter goes on WSIB, but again, it's the human cost, because it's a member of your department and a member of your community that could have had a workplace illness because of not having that policy or not looking after the gear. We didn't know this 10 or 15 years ago, but we do know it now, and it kind of needs to be addressed. Fit testing, you are fit testing for your masks every year, but there's a couple other types of masks that the department wears, including an N95, which is just kind of the mask that goes over your nose and mouth. And then there's another mask they use for investigations and during overhaul. They're not fit testing them. It's really easy to do that. You're already doing fit testing for the others. So that's something that kind of needs to be looked after. Health and wellness, again, something that's coming to light over the last number of years, both critical and stress, as well as post-traumatic stress syndrome. It's tough to develop these programs, and it's tough in your location, and it's tough in this day and age to develop these programs, but you need to kind of work away at it. You need to get some resources, whatever it is, whether it's by Zoom or whatever the case might be, to get to support for some of this. But it goes a little bit farther. We need to make sure that we have programs that offer nutrition, physical activity, smoking cessation. And, these are all the kind of things that we can do for the firefighters to keep them healthy, to make sure that they can still respond. Because your community and the size of your community, you don't have 50 or 75 people on a wait list to get in to be volunteer firefighters. So you want to make sure they're healthy. They're healthy for their families, they're healthy for your community. Excuse me. The officer development program. So under the Act, the officer development program does pertain. So there's a section in the Act that talks about the competent supervisor. So the important is, now that the certification process is there, it allows you to build the process or promotional process on being a competent supervisor and what training they have to have. And again, you can't do this overnight. It's going to take some time. It's 2028 is the 2026 and then 2028 are the deadlines. But at least it now allows the chief to say, okay, to be promoted, this is the stuff you got to work towards. So you need to have this level of certification and this level of health and safety training and this level of training, so that you can show that you're not only going to make them a better officer, but you're also covering yourself with the Act as well too. So it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort. And it might take a little bit of funds to do it, but it's going to work out. And if you just, again, build that plan so that they can look after that. So there's a number of recommendations. Some of them are administrative and can be, I won't say not work. They are going to be work, but there's stuff that can be done fairly easily. So the first one is the fire chief should add an additional management rep and an additional worker rep to the Joint Health and Safety Committee. They don't require it. With the numbers they have, one-on-one, it works. But the challenge is, of course, is sometimes what happens is you don't have a meeting because one of them isn't available for the meeting or the inspection. So there's two reasons we're recommending this. One is to have that redundancy, so there's always somebody can be at the meeting, so you don't miss the meetings. The other one is to educate somebody. So if a member leaves because you're in a volunteer service, or somebody gets sick, then the other person just steps right in, and you're not worrying about whether you're catching them up to speed or whatever the case might be. So if you can get the people, there's not, that doesn't add to the budget process. It just, other than the initial certification, but it does make it a little more, the single point of failure thing is we can't have any more. Like we're kind of past that. So number two is the Joint Health and Safety Committee should ensure that it meets all the necessary legislation under the Act. So those, several things they talked about, making sure the board was up to speed and doing the minutes. They need to make sure they're doing that. And that's not just a chief thing. That's a worker thing as well too, right? That's a departmental thing. It's really the committee that needs to look after that. The fire chief should ensure the department installs the bunker gear machine in an appropriate location in the fire hall. And I apologize, I should have mentioned right off the bat, most of these recommendations either say council or the fire chief. That doesn't mean the fire chief has to do them all. They have a team, and some of this stuff should be delegated. So the fire chief should recommend updating the annual budget to accommodate the purchase of 3 sets of spare personal protective equipment per year for the next 5 years. Why we're suggesting that is so that you start building up some spare gear, so you're not losing community members when you have to send your gear away for testing, annual testing. You can't do that inside. Or you have a bad incident, and all of a sudden there's 15 sets of gear that are contaminated. You're not out of service because you haven't got the redundancy. You can't call a neighboring department that's 20 kilometers down the road like they can in Southern Ontario. Number 5 is the fire chief should develop a standard operating guideline for handling personal protective equipment that becomes contaminated at emergency scenes. So that's a standard operating guideline. The fire chief should expand the department's mass testing program to include N95 and multi-purpose masks. The fire chief should form a health and wellness committee with representation from all department ranks to develop and implement this health and wellness program. Number 8, the fire chief should find a critical incident stress team to support the department. And the last one is the fire chief should develop an officer development program that ensures all the personnel obtain the applicable NFPA certifications for whatever rank that they might be in. Thank you. So prevention and public education. I talked about those 3 lines of defense, the defense, the fire suppression, code enforcement, and public education. Years ago, you know, when I started in the service, fire suppression was number 1 because that's all we want to do. We want the red trucks and the lights and the sirens and away we want to go. Well, we've changed, and for the right reasons. We all know if we can prevent something before it happens is a better way to go. Fire suppression, when we go to fight a fire, there's a lot of risk on our community. There's a lot of risk in our firefighters. It's the most cost that we don't control. We can't control. The building the fire will last as long as it is. The firefighters will have to be there as long as they need to be. We can't control the costs. We'll always have to have fire suppression. Doesn't mean you get rid of them. But if we can do public education, which the department is doing a lot of, and we'll talk about that, but the other one is code enforcement. You know, doing the inspections, making sure we have working smoke alarms, making sure we have fire separations. That's how you save lives. That's how you're going to prevent your community or tragedies in your communities. So in the considerations, so we looked at the public education initiatives. Obviously, we all know during the COVID time, there was no initiatives because we couldn't go to the schools. We couldn't be in public. The department is now getting that ramp back up. Here we are now in 2024, being able to do that. The inspection programs that you're doing is basically on complaint and request. And I said at the start, you're compliant. That's what the legislation says. However, it's not being proactive, right? You really need those good, solid inspection programs in order to prevent the fire before it happens. You have a great smoke and seal alarm program. The chief and I talked about how to do better in doing the documentation piece to make sure that you're documenting, when you go and put in a smoke alarm, and you see a large fire or a tragedy fire in any community. What's one of the first things they ask? When was the last time that was inspected? So you want to kind of start preventing some of that. Investigations is done, by the chief or the officers, unless it gets into the criteria where the fire marshal has to come in. Pre-incident planning is something that we maybe do. You do on a less formal basis. You drive by a building and you kind of say, well, you know what, if we had a fire there's a hydrant. What we're suggesting is that it's another way to help protect your firefighters is do formal pre-incident planning. Go into a building and actually plan it. So if we had a fire here, where is the hydrant? Oh, it's across the street. Where's the fire alarm system? Where's the people located in the upper story of the mercantile buildings? So that's another place where we think that in fire prevention that can support and be safer for the firefighters. So the recommendations in fire prevention is, first is the fire chief should develop a fire prevention policy that specifies fire inspection frequencies based on risk and occupancy type. And the fire chief should present this policy to council for their consideration or adoption. So you might say, and I'm just picking one, a school. So, every 2 years, we're going to do an inspection in the school. Industry, every year, we're going to do an industry inspection. A vulnerable occupancy, you already have to do every year because that's legislation. A commercial occupancy, well, we're going to do that every 2 years. A place of worship is going to be every 5 years. So I'm just picking numbers. I'm not suggesting that you do that. But what that allows you to do is to start becoming proactive. And, in your community, and it kind of sets a standard that you're going to be a fire safe community. That's what you're going to do. We're not just going to put the fires out. We're going to try to help you prevent the fires. The fire chief should develop a process for documenting the results of the department's smoke and CO program. They are writing, like the firefighters are doing the sheets, the chief is keeping the sheets. What we're suggesting is just do a better job at the documenting and making sure you're keeping those records. And we're going to talk about records management in a bit anyway. And the fire chief should develop an annual pre-incident planning program based on the risks identified in the community risk assessment.
Terry, I think we're reaching about the halfway point in your presentation, are we not?
Yeah, pretty close. Yeah,
pretty close.
Yeah.
So when we get to before the next session or next second half, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of catch your breath. I feel like we're receiving a lot of information kind of through a fire hose, if you will. Please accept my pun.
Yeah.
But from doing a lot of presentations myself, I always appreciated the point to kind of
thank you for that.
Take a breather and maybe offer council the opportunity to ask questions based on the
Sure.
three sessions we've received to date: stakeholder engagement, occupational health and safety, and fire prevention. Is there any questions or comments on, I know Councillor Hatfield had a few questions to date, but can you use your microphone, Councillor Hatfield?
My question, I just don't know how the department is going to do all this work you want them to do.
Through you, Madam Mayor. That's a great question, Councillor, and it's a question that many volunteer departments and some medium-sized departments are struggling with. The way we've laid this out in the strategic, the way we've laid this out in as far as a strategic plan is to, do what you accomplish. Like what the chief should do with this now is go back and say, okay, and we've laid out immediate, short-term, and long-term. So what can we accomplish in the short term or the immediate term? What can we accomplish? So you might choose to say, okay, we're going to try to clean up the administrative ones. So we're going to get the bylaws done. We're going to get the agreements done. We're going to work away on policies. The other thing is you don't have to do this in isolation. Fire prevention policies, there's lots of, through the Chiefs Network, there's lots of departments that have good fire prevention policies. The OFM, Ontario Fire Marshal's Office, has a standard for a fireman. So you're not necessarily creating a whole new document. You're taking that standard, putting your piece to the part of it, the Wawa piece to it, and then bring it to council. I said at the start about having that team. So, the chief needs to rely on the CAO and the rest of the staff to help with some of that. One of the things the chief and I've talked lots about is empowering the firefighters and the officers to help with some of this. It doesn't all have to be on the back of the fire chief. So I don't disagree with you. It looks like a lot. It's to start pulling it apart and saying, put it up there and say, okay, what can we do? What can we accomplish this year? And you don't have to accomplish all in 1 year. If it takes you 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that's okay, right?
Terry, what can council do to help the fire department?
You're on.
Oh, now? Okay, thank you. Become volunteer firefighters.
I think I'm too old.
So I think council is doing a tremendous job of supporting the fire service now. And I think that, the hope is that they can continue with that. And with this report, I hope that you have a better understanding. So and with your risk assessment, that when the chief comes in 6 months or a year's time and says to council, we'd like to do this, or this is what we need to do based on the recommendation and the information that we got here. I think that's how council can help set good policy for your community. Support that way. We know that budgets are tough everywhere, right? So what can we do by supporting budget? How can we strategically plan? We're going to show you some initiatives where you can actually save some budget money. So how can we support them financially if as possible? We know you have lots of pressures. It's not just the fire service that has pressures in your community. So I think that's how they can support, is continue what you're doing today, and just when he brings policies forward, especially administrative policies, ask the questions, be informed, and if you can, support them.
Just one last question, Terry. I find our fire chief overworked, and like he has 3 jobs, and I find that I find it difficult to understand that. And everybody loves Kevin, but we just find him overworked.
If I may, through you, Madam Mayor, if I could hold that question to the last section, because that whole section, that's what we talk about is.
Yeah, the last part. Yeah.
I agree with you.
Councillor Hatfield, I'll just ask you to.
Sorry. I think we really want to be a council that works with every department. the best we can. And we're not saying this to be nasty or anything. We're concerned. And if we can clear that concern, fantastic.
Councillor Rapato, do you have any questions or comments before we move on to the next section? Councillor Hoffman? Councillor Cannon? Perfect. Terry, please feel free to continue.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for allowing me the break.
Wasn't much of a break.
Better than I get some way. Sorry. So level of service, and with the level of service section, sometimes we, in some municipalities, we have to go a little deeper into the level of service because there's, you got departments that are within, there's stations that are within 20 kilometers of each other. Well, you don't have that issue here. In lots of departments in Northern Ontario don't have. So when we started looking into levels of service, we looked at two different types of services. So your core services, which are your bread and butter services, it's the stuff that the fire service does every day, every week, every month. They go to the highway, you go to, you attend fires, you attend alarm ringings. So that's kind of your core services. So again, that's a council driven or council approved level of service is what you want to do for your community. Then the other part to look at is specialized services. And in your community, the specialized services are basically these four. There's a lot more. There's trench rescue, confined rescue. There's no need for your department to be in any of those. You've never had a call for service. It's not conducive. It's expensive when they really need to concentrate on doing the core services rather than expanding the specialized services. So when we looked at these specialized, there's kind of three levels out there. So your hazardous material response, they go to the highway all the time, and they respond to spills on the highway, big, small. So right now your department's currently at an awareness level, which means they're really not supposed to do anything. They're supposed to pull up and say, yep, there's a spill, and that's it. Well, we know that's not practical. That's not what's happening, and nor should it be what happened. So in order to get there, they need to be at an operational level. Not really hard. It's a little bit more training. All the new recruits are going to be trained at that level because of certification anyways. So it won't be a large task for the department, and it needs to be done by 2028. So you've actually got 4 years to make sure they're up to that level. Auto extrication. So we have auto extrication on there, but it's really not the auto. The auto extrication, the cars are bread and butter. They do that all the time. What the auto extrication service is getting in the heavy truck. So we know they go to the highway. We know they deal with heavy trucks. So by 2028, they need to be certified in the heavy truck. Rope rescue, what we're looking at there is low angle. They, through our engagements, looking at your community, there's times where they may have to go down over the side of the embankment off the highway. They need to get equipment down and they need to get people back up. So low level rope rescue, again, it's not a lot. It's some policy to be done. There's a little bit of equipment that goes along, but not a huge thing. The water ice rescue, and I'm just going to leave the surface water or the boat here for a second, but the water ice rescue program. So right now, if we stick with just the shore-based water rescue and the ice rescue, you're all set up. You have all the equipment. They do lots of training. They have procedures in place. They can be tweaked a little bit, but you're there. You can manage those programs already. Ropes, very easy. Auto X or heavy trucks, you're pretty well there as well. In order to look at these services as well, is you got to make sure that you got enough firefighters. You got to make sure they're trained and make sure that you have enough calls for service to warrant the cost. Because there is a cost. There's a cost of the training, and there's a cost of making sure that the people are certified and you have enough people. So in the document, we talk about your surface water program. That's what it's called under the NFPA. And that's taking the boat out onto your lake, onto Wawa Lake. Never mind the Lake Superior, shouldn't be out there. But onto Wawa Lake. So we did look at your boat. We did look at the program. Yes, you've got the suits. Yes, you've got the PFDs and all that. But the boat, when we looked at the boat, it's not conducive to really in a water rescue program. So there's two options. And the first option, and this is the option we're recommending, is suspending the water rescue program. Suspend it. Don't stop it, or don't say it's gone forever, but suspend it. Make sure you look after the core stuff first before you expand the programs. The department, through the statistics, haven't had a call for service on the surface water for 20 years. Once the department completes all the training and certified in the core services, then the council and the department should reassess whether you should get into the surface water program. And if the surface water program is still required, the fire chief should meet with the OPP and the Canadian Coast Guard to see what abilities they have to support your community. So that's our recommendation, to suspend it. You'll see that in the recommendations. If council chooses to continue with the program, and that's council's decision as setting level of service for the community, here's some of the stuff that you have to do by legislation. So you have to identify the time and the money required to maintain the program. So we're recommending that the chief, in the recommendations, we recommend the chief do that. You need to have a proper boat, and you need to have proper licensing of the boat, and you need to have proper training of the firefighters. So the boat is not like a pleasure craft that we all have. The boat, when you begin to use it for this type of operation or surface water, becomes a work vessel under Transport Canada regulations, which means it needs to be licensed commercially, and the training changes. Yes, the people can still have a pleasure craft license, but now they need to have safety course to operate the boat as a work vessel. So there's a number of courses out there that can do that. All the firefighters will need to be trained to the NFPA standard by 2028. You need to develop guidelines for doing surface water rescue. You need to look at the OPP and Coast Guard, how they could maybe support, because putting 4 people out on a boat all by themselves without any support, could be a problem, and safety wise. And then of course request council improve the operating and capital purchases to maintain that program. So here's our recommendations on level of service. So the fire chief should prepare a report that recommends allocating funds to the department to support safe and efficient delivery of specialized services. So those 4 specialized that we talked about, the hazmat and the rope rescue and auto extrication and water ice rescue. Number 2 is council should suspend the department surface water rescue program until the fire chief has completed a review of the services that identifies certification requirements and associated costs. And if you bring that to council, then council can make the decision whether you want to be in the surface water rescue business. And number 3 is that the fire chief and council should update the Wawa's establishing regulating bylaw to reflect all specialized services the department currently provides, including hazardous material and rope rescue. So again, going back to the establishing regulating bylaw, just make sure it's current. Just that, and that can be all done in one session, right? Once you get the bylaw, you don't have to have separate times to bring the bylaw back. Training, again, a number of recommendations in training. You're going to see that a lot of it has to do with kind of the administrative side of training. So we know that training is legislated. If you're going to perform a task, you need to have the training. It's pretty straightforward in the Act. The other thing that the Act does is that the province of Ontario requires all workers to have certain types of training, WHMIS, accessibility for Ontario's with the Disabilities Act, workplace harassment, or any other corporate training that is set out. So that training needs to be done as well too, on top of the other training that the firefighters have to do. Certification, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You've heard certification for the last several years. I am going to talk a little bit about where you're at with your department, which is good. But certification is here. By 2026, all your firefighters to do certain tasks will be at a certain level. And by 2028, some of the other tasks will have to be there. So it does give you some time for the chief to have that strategic plan of where you kind of need to be. There's different types of training that the department does. There's the recruit training and just on a side note, last night at the firefighters session, all 6-year new recruits were at the session, which is a good thing to see. So that was good. There's in-service training. So that's their regular training nights that they go to, that they do all the maintenance on their subjects, and then of course the provincial training or the extra training that you have to do. Right now, one of the challenges is for your department and a lot of departments is right now you have the ability of about 60 hours. If they went to every single training night, you have about 60 hours. The way the department has been able to kind of augment that is doing some Saturday trainings and doing some of that to kind of give exposure or allow people to come and do more training. So some of the challenges, obviously time, every department's having challenges with time. The cost of training, the cost of certification for a community is processing challenges. So right now your process is the chief basically makes up the training, puts it out for the next couple of weeks or the next session, and they go forward. So we've got some work that we think that can help with that. And then the biggest one is documentation. The records are there. I don't want you thinking that the chief's not keeping records or the department. I've seen them all, but they're all manual, right? There's inexpensive ways to be able to put that into a process. That if you need to report on how many people have had SCBA training, for example, you push a button and out it spits out. So that's where you want to get up to. And I want to talk a little bit about the training facility. I got a tour of the training facility, and the person that took me was pretty proud of the training facility. He's your fire chief. And when I met the firefighters last night, they're very proud of the training facility too. So it's a great facility. We all know that with the fire college disbanding a number of years ago, it put a lot of pressure on communities to where to get training. They've done a great job out there. It's all home built. It's all applicable training. So it's a great training center. And my recommendation that I'm going to talk about in a sec is the council supports that training center because it is a great place. And other departments, I heard the chief talk about last night about some training that's going to come to your community, and they've invited the neighboring communities to come and participate in the training there. So it's a good facility. So the recommendations in the training is that the chief should ensure the department's firefighters receive motor vehicle collision training to the standard by 2028, and that's that truck training to get up to that truck training. The fire chief should establish a training committee to help the department's training program develop quarterly and biannually training schedules and prepare lesson plans. One of the things that Chief and I have had lots of discussions with is about allowing and empowering the group of people to help support them. And the training committee, we think, is one way. And when we talked to the firefighters last night, there was very, very positive feedback about forming a training committee that can help design the training, help prepare lesson plans, and starts publishing out schedules further ahead. So the fire chief should review the department's training program to verify it's covering the core services. So again, that's with the committee is, okay, we know what a core service is. We got to make sure that we got to cover off these subjects. You don't have to do them all in 1 year. There's lots of departments that are saying we're going to do our core subjects over a 5-year time period because we only have 60 hours a year to be able to do that. So the fire chief should develop a strategic plan that outlines how the department will meet the applicable certification by 2026 and 2028, while continuing to provide all the council-approved services. Number 5 is the department should ensure that the recruits complete the theoretical, practical training it needs to complete the certifications. So that's where you're headed. And that's really the way certification was designed, was to, as the recruits come in, make sure that they're getting certified. So in 10 and 15 and 20 years, you have certified. Number 6 is the department should ensure that its non-grandfathered firefighters complete the theoretical and practical training to obtain certifications. Number 7 is the fire chief should develop standing operating guidelines that outline how firefighters with the different levels of certification would operate at emergency scenes. And number 8 is council should ensure that Wawa's budget includes ongoing funding for the department's training facility. So just one thing on the grandfathering process. So when we looked at your standards, your department, every member of the department has either, other than those new 6 recruits, has either been grandfathered to certification, is certified, or has been legacied so that they can go into interior structure firefighting or auto extrication. So you're in good shape. There's 9 members that were legacied, and you want to work towards getting them certified down the road. But right today, you're in great shape to be able to go and perform those tasks. So it's what you do kind of going forward and how you work away at that. So. Performance standards, I won't spend a lot of time. When you read the document, it talks a lot about your statistics. Basically, what's the response time, and we talk about how important the crew size is and to go to property fires. We're recommending in a lot of studies, look at 14 firefighters on a property fire or a single family dwelling fire to have that effective response force. And your average over the last 5 years is 13. So you're there. You're putting the right number of people on location, and that's doing it all yourselves. That's not calling in a mutual aid partner that's 20 kilometers away. So you're doing it. You're doing a good job with that. So the deployment model, the chief is, we explained with having the highway, we have really two unique circumstances. You got to protect a large stretch of the highway, but still protect your municipality. So the way they have that deployment model set up is good. So it's basically you have what you have, right? So how do you keep managing it? How do you keep recruiting to keep those numbers up around those 13 and 14? I was here one of the days, and there was a call that came in, and in the middle of the day, and there was like 9 people. And we don't see that a lot in volunteer services. So that's kudos to both the chief and the department as well too. So a couple of recommendations in the performance standards, so that the fire chief should use historical data and effective response force model to develop a baseline for the department's response standard, and the fire chief should submit that proposed response to council for the consideration. So, Councillor, you asked one of the ways to support the department. This is one of the ways. Let the chief look at the data. A lot of it's here. Look at the data and be able to say to council, this is the level of service that we can provide for the community, and then adopt that level of service so that everybody knows in your community that this is what we're going to do. It doesn't bind you, because you don't do 100% of the time. You do those 80 or 90% percentiles. This is the level of prevention we're going to do. This is the level of inspections we're going to do, and this is the level of response that you can get for your community. And be proud of that, and tell your community that. So that's one of the ways I think that council can support the chief on that. The fire chief also should develop a strategic plan that outlines how the department will continue providing the council level of service, and the fire chief should then submit the proposed plan for council's consideration and adoption. The next one I know is near and dear to everybody's heart. It certainly, when I met with the firefighters last night, they all kind of sat up a little bit more when I got to this section. But so one of the things that our task was in the request for proposal was to review the fire station. Our expertise does not look at the HVAC system. Our expertise doesn't look that you got the right power supply. Our expertise is basically, how do you manage the facility? How functional is it to be able to provide the service today and for the next 50 or 60 years, So I got a great history from the deputy chief on how the station came about. It started, and then there was growth, so they added bays, and then there was growth, and they added the kind of the other sections. So as you grew, you started adding sections from the time that it started. So some of the issues we found in the current fire station is everywhere we kind of went, there were storage issues. There was storage everywhere, every nook and cranny. It looked like my garage. That if there was a hole, that's exactly where my hammer went that day, right? So that was an issue that we looked at. How do you manage storage? You have to have some storage for sure, but is it the proper storage? Are you keeping the proper things? Is there stuff that you don't need? Can another department use it? Can it go to the Firefighters Without Borders? The training rooms were really non-existent. They were hard to use. There's 3 big, you got your big room and there's 2 other small rooms, but you can't really use them as a training facility because there's no room, because there was so much storage in there. And the other thing is the technology. Today's technology, is having up-to-date a TV or a whiteboard versus a chalkboard and that kind of stuff that can help with the training A lot of their training is virtual now. When they get their certification, they do it online. So looking at those places and how do you have a storage area as well as have proper training area. And I mean, the common room there is a great size training room, right? You can bring instructors in and have all your department there to kind of do training. We looked at the washroom and the shower facilities, which are really non-existent. So that's something we're not suggesting that you need to go out and put in, 2 or 3 sets of washrooms. You don't need that. You can put in general neutral, but you do have to have a proper washroom facility and the shower facilities. Again, if your firefighters or your members of your community are contaminated, the firefighters, then they have to have a place. The apparatus floor area really wasn't any different. There was lots of storage on the apparatus floor. You have response gear in a room, and they have to go from one area they get their gear in one area, they come flying through the administrative area to get a truck in the other area, or if they got to get their water ice rescue suits in, they go into another area to pick up their radio and then go to kind of one of the trucks. So spatial constraints, the station is busting at the seams. Council is well aware that there's one truck that's still sitting in a public works building, so there's some spatial constraints. And we did look at whether new construction or renovations is what's the best option for you. So with our group, and we spent a lot of time with this on this section, there's the number of recommendations there that we're going to talk about, and we did look at kind of where you should go between renovations and construction. So the first recommendation, and again, the fire chief doesn't have to do this himself, or we hope he doesn't do this himself, but the fire chief should arrange and remove all the necessary equipment and materials from the station. When you look at the space there is lots of space. It's not functional, no two ways. It's a cut up building for reasons, it was all the right reasons. But if you clean that space up and then kind of look at what you got, and then how can you make this a training area? And how can you make this a storage room? How do we fix the washroom facility so it's a usable washroom? Number 2 is the fire chief, deputy chief, and officers should work together to develop a plan that will allow the department to use the fire station's administrative area for training and storage needs. So bring the officers in, say, here's our space. We're going to clean it all up. Now the space, how are we going to manage this? What's going to work best as a group for us? Number 3 is the fire chief should recommend budgeting to update the fire station administrative area. The budget should include funds for painting the administrative area, purchasing new equipment such as tables, chairs, smart TVs, whiteboards, and the fire chief should submit that proposed budget for council's consideration and approval. So, make it a usable fire hall. No matter what you do down the road with a new station, and our recommendation is that somewhere you got to work towards a new station. Adding another addition is just like adding on another room, right? It's still going to be a non-functional cut up. And remember that you're thinking about not just about today. 50 years from now, you want that station to still be a functional station. But that doesn't mean that you have to. It's still got to function today, because you're not going to build a new station tomorrow. It's going to take, if you push the button today, it's a 3-year process. So it's still got to be functioning. So we're suggesting invest a little bit of money into the building by doing some paint, get some good training aids in there that can help. Number 4 is the fire chief should arrange for the fire station's washroom to undergo a complete renovation. The renovation should include the installation of new fixtures, including a shower, and the removing any of the traces of mold. Again, it can be a general neutral facility, but have a shower and a water closet and a sink in there. Number 5 is the fire chief should form a committee to develop a plan that supports building a new fire station that prioritizes functionality or aesthetics. So what we said when we met with the CO and the chief, one of the things we said, you need to start working towards, because you never know in the future whether funding will come out or an opportunity might come out to share. You want to be ready for that. So by getting this committee together is get ready for it and make the priority of the committee is to build a functioning fire station. Look at the square footage versus what it's going to look like outside. What's the grounds going to be? Yes, you need some land for the training and that, but I need an office for this space. I need 2 washrooms, by code, we'll say, we need to have an apparatus floor area that takes 5 vehicles. That's the kind of stuff that you kind of want to get to. And then the fire chief and the CO clerk should consider discussing the possibility of a joint facility replacing the existing firefighter, internal or external. Look at other opportunities or be ready for other opportunities as it goes along. Number 7 is council should continue funding a building reserve account and exploring the potential infrastructure grants as applicable. We know we looked, there's nothing today, but that doesn't mean that may not be something in 2 years' time. So you want to be ready. And the fire chief should research different fire station designs until finding a configuration that meets the community's current and future risks, needs, and circumstances. The fire chief should present design for council's consideration and approval. Our recommendation is to build a new fire station. We know you can't do it today. It's a very pricey venture compared to, in comparison, you've got a lot of pressures in your community. However, we think you need to be ready for it, and we think putting a lot of money into the building that you have is not money well spent. You're better to save the money and move towards a new station at whatever point happens down the road. Asset management. So in the asset management section, we looked at your fire apparatus and we looked at your equipment. We reviewed your fleet renewal and rationalization program. And we do have some recommendations in the report of where we think you should move towards your fleet that would have some cost savings for the community. So I'll start with the fire equipment. So the equipment we all know we need, there's certain equipment the fire service needs. Some of it, a lot of it has life cycle. And you just bought new self-contained breathing apparatus for the firefighters. They're state of the art. They're as good as anybody's using in this country and probably North America. But in 10 or 12 or 15 years time, you're going to have to replace them. So what do we do to be ready for that? And it's tough, like I get that piece. You have great jaws of life, but what do we do if in 15 years I got to replace the jaws of life? So what we're saying is you need to build those, or the chief and the team need to build those asset plans out. So to be ready for it, don't wait till it breaks and say, oh, we don't have the money for it. Where are we going to find the money? All of a sudden it's broke. So let's put $1 every year into a reserve, so that we know in 15 years we're going to be maybe not there, but we'll be a little closer to help support. So you can identify lifespans and life cycles, and if it lasts longer, if the generator lasts longer than 20 years, that's great, right? But at least you got to kind of try to build. And I know it again. I understand. I know it's very hard. In your fleet, the next slide, please. So we looked at your current fire fleet. We look at what you got today, and I don't have to tell council the expense of fire fleet. 42% increase in fire fleet last year, and that's just last year, let alone the years before and the year before and the year before. So it's and not just fire fleet. Your dump trucks and your fleet, the rest of your corporate vehicles are. We looked at the type of responses that you do for your department, or the department does. We look at the highway challenge that you have and keeping equipment back to protect the community here. We looked at your staffing levels, because it's great to say, okay, we're going to downsize, we're going to go to 2-man cab trucks, but you got 14 people going to a fire scene. How do you put, if you only have 4 trucks with 2-man cab trucks, what do the other 6 or 7 people do? And you don't want to go back to where they're driving their cars out on the highway in the middle of a snowstorm. So you want to make sure you have the right levels. Your apparatus licensing certification qualifications are all there. Your maintenance is all there. You are testing your pumps. You are testing your ladders. Your age and insurance grading purposes, you're in the ballpark. You're there, and in reality, the fire underwriters allows you to go on beyond the 20 years, provided you test the apparatus, and so and in your case, it's not going to make much of a difference, anyways. So as long as you keep your trucks up to snuff and test them every year, you can get to that 25-year window. So your current fire fleet looks like this, and I estimated some costs based on their scary numbers. I said to the chief a couple times I wouldn't want to be the fire chief going in front of council now and asking for a fire truck, but so here's where you're at. So you're running 2 pumpers. You have a tanker over there. The tanker that the chief bought has pumping capability, so that's a plus for your community. And then you have a light rescue, and that's kind of the dollar amounts that would cost. There's the projected replacement years based on the standards of 25 years. Your tanker with the pump on it is new. You've got a 25-year-old pumper now, so you're at the time where you got to kind of be looking to do that. Here's what we're recommending for the chief and for council. So your current deployment, 2 pumps, that tanker, and a light rescue. what we're recommending is you start working towards a deployment program that sees a 25-gallon pumper tanker to replace the old tanker coming in, and get rid of the other newer pumper. Sell it for whatever money you can get. There's a good market now. So at the same time, maybe you're purchasing the new truck, have that as part of the deal. So now you have a pumper tanker with 2,500 gallons. Your other tanker, you convert that over, because it truly is a pumper tanker. It's a tanker with a pump. It's got hose. It's got water. So convert that over, make it one of your pumps. So now you've got 2 pumper tankers with lots of water. Now when you go to the highway, you send out a pumper. Instead of right now, the chief has to send a pumper tanker and the rescue out to the highway because he has enough water. You can send 1 pumper tanker out there, 1 rescue truck out there, and that still leaves a lot of water and another truck here if you got to go out to Hawk Junction. So, and in that, you're downsizing your fleet by 1 vehicle. Potentially at some point, some council, it's going to save $800,000 by today's standards. So that's a good thing. The light rescue, what we're suggesting is go to a heavy rescue. So again, then you can put all the tools on this heavy rescue. So when it goes to the highway, it's all there. You now have a place for rehab you can put inside. You can have a command post. So when it's due up to replace that, is go to a heavy rescue vehicle, and then purchase a 3/4 ton support vehicle that can tow trailers, that can bring equipment back from a fire scene. But if you look at what your potential cost is there on the left of 2.7 million, by changing and making some changes, and again, I'm not telling you, not suggesting for a minute you do it today, but as you kind of start changing your vehicles or have to, this is the deployment model you go to. You've saved $400,000 by today's standards, and that's a lot of money in savings that can be done. So that's the deployment model we're recommending to go to. Number 1 in the asset, so the fire chief should develop a report for council that recommends adopting the apparatus deployment model outlining in the fire service review. And number 2, the department or the fire chief should develop a plan to replace the department's fire equipment based on life cycle consideration. Records management, I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but it is really important, and I don't mean to skip over it. But so records management, chief and I did the community risk assessment, and we had to look at property fires, and the chief did a great job of going to all these binders up on top of the shelving, pulling out them all, and remembered exactly where the call was, what it was. What happens in 5 years' time when the chief's not here? How do we get that data? So we spent a lot of time doing paper. We all know where technology's headed, and there's records management, fire service records management. You have a records management program here that will do the payroll and your HR, but a true records management for a fire service helps do your reporting for the province. It'll help keep track of your equipment. It'll help keep track of inspections, your public education programs, and it's really an inexpensive program. The costs are very, very small in the large scale of things. So once it gets set up in there, again, when you need to recall information because of an incident, or you just push the button, it spits it out, and kind of it's all there. So it does allow to start tracking better the information rather than it being in hard copy everywhere. So once you get it, the sky's the limit. The officers can do the report. So right now they fill it out in paper. The chief has to do it out and fill it out for the province, where if you get the right records management program, you tie it into how they get dispatched. When the officer gets there, or whoever's doing the report gets there, it can be populated. The address can be in there, all the times can be in there. They go in and say what they did, and then that's it. It's all done. So it's also a time-saving thing, and pressure on both the chief and the group. So the 2 recommendations here is that the fire chief should research different records management systems to find a program that will meet the department's record-keeping needs. Fire chief should recommend the purchasing program through the budget process. And number 2 is the fire chief should work with the CAO clerk to explore ways of providing the department with part-time administrative support for data entry and records management needs. Chief is very similar in kind of when I was a chief. You have bright, talented people that do data entry and work with administrative programs. They're the people you want doing the programs, not me. I take 3 times as long for them to do it. And then you get somebody that can take some ownership, right? So if a firefighter needs something, that's right there, and they push a key and away we go. We're not talking a lot of calls. There's not talking a lot of training. We're not a lot of inputting. So it's basically taking the sheet and then input it into the system. So the last section. And there's some charts in here I want to talk about. So we took one of the things that we recognized really early on, like when we had our team meetings, like when we started looking at some of the documentation of the paperwork, and you go, so why is this happening, right? Like we know the passion of the firefighters, we know the passion of your fire chief. So what is the underlying issues that can help continue with some of this stuff that gets pushed on the side of the desk or doesn't get done at all. And then we talked a little bit about earlier, council. So you all know your role of your fire chief, and we all know why you get there. And there's lots of municipalities that get there that way. Your chief is filling multiple roles. Chief building official, which sometimes makes a lot of sense, because he can go to a building and looks at it from 2 perspectives now, right? So your community might be safer. He's your bylaw officer, your animal control. He sits on the corporate administrative team, which he should, and I'm glad to see that here. And he's also the fire chief. And he not only does some of those roles here, he does it in White River, he does it in Dubreuilville, which I'm not saying for a minute that you kind of get rid of that. So we looked at the workload of the fire chief. So we asked the chief to provide us with a time management study. And on page 117 of the document, we looked at this time management study, all of 2022 and right up to August of 2023. And some interesting facts started coming out. So the expected workload of the chief is about 1,820 hours. His actual hours worked was 2,146 in 2022, and his approved time off was another 237, and his total hours was 2,383, which means he works an average of 46 hours a week. Not uncommon as a manager of a municipality. I'm a manager for our corporation. I do exactly the same thing. But what was interesting is when we started looking at the charts, we didn't see a lot of fire time. So we said to the chief, where's your fire time? And he said, I don't record that. So all these hours the chief is putting in, fire stuff that he does in the evenings and all the weekends is not being recorded. That's pretty dedicated in my view. So when you look at page 118 of the document, 76% of his time is dedicated to the chief building official and his bylaw and animal control. 21% of the time is dedicated to the fire service, and that's not including after hours, the evenings and the weekends like last night. So, that's when you start looking at why some of the stuff doesn't get done, you start looking at the workload. And you can see after we started looking at the time management study, we started seeing where and it's all easy for us to start taking our paper and pushing to the side when we're, not literally, but we're putting out fires every day and looking after our clients and looking after your residents. So that's one of the things that we looked at, and we have some recommendations along that. The second one is your succession planning for your next candidate. You have a tremendous opportunity because of your bylaw that that the chief has to retire when he turns 65 from the fire service. And some people say, that's tough and not like too bad, but it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing to lose the experience. But what a positive process. You can prepare today for when the chief retires. When I left my last municipality, I went to my CAO and said, I'm leaving in a month's time. Now, we had done some work, but not like the opportunity that you have now. So you have a great opportunity, the CAO, working with the fire chief, have a great opportunity to say, what's it going to look like and whatever, and I don't know the chief's exact time, but what's going to look like when he turns 65. First off, should the roles be the same? Not likely are you going to find a fire chief that can be the chief building official at the same time. So you possibly and should be splitting those roles, whatever that looks like. Where does bylaw end up? Does it end up with a fire chief? Happens in lots of communities. Or does it stay with a building official? There's a couple ways, there's no secret. There's a couple ways of replacing an employee. You either hire internal or you hire external. Again, with your opportunity you can hire external, you post it, person gets in a couple months time, then you start trying to train them. But you have a great opportunity with knowing that this is going to happen to say to your internal people, here's the time, let's get ready. If you truly want to be the fire chief of this department internally, here's the steps that you got to do to get there. So that's awesome. You can say to everybody, you don't just say to the one person or two people, you say to everybody, here's what you got to do. So we laid out a 3-step process, recommended the 3-step process for the chief and the CAO in here. And so first step is you say to all the candidates, if you want to be the next fire chief, here's what's important. Here's the certifications you got to have. We're going to concentrate more on public education and prevention. So we want you to have those courses. We want you to make sure you're prepared to step into that role. So get them ready for the role rather than give them the role and then say, okay, now you got to go do all this. Step 2 is let the candidate or the candidates, if there's a couple that are interested, let them start doing some inspections. So again, take some workload off the fire chief, let them start doing some inspections and code enforcement, and let them start managing the prevention program. Give them some experience from the education. And then step 3 is don't wait till the chief leaves to make the person the fire chief. Let the person be the fire chief at whatever time you choose, while the chief's still here. So the chief can support the individual, chief can provide guidance to the individual, the person can walk across from whatever office and say to the chief, how did you do this? Or why did we do this? Don't lose the history that you got from your fire chief. So next slide. So number 1 is the fire chief should track how much time he spends completing fire department duties after normal hours. I know why he's doing it, because he's dedicated to your community. But it doesn't help you with looking at the real picture to get to strategically move forward. If you're doing it this level in person hours and the CBO does this level in person hours down the road, then that helps the CEO to make decisions of what it's going to look like in 2 or 3 years' time or whatever the time frame might be. Number 2 is the fire chief should review his assigned duties, determine what duties can be delegated to the other members of the department. So what can, we talked about the training committee. So in the recommendation, we talked about the deputy chief managing the training committee. So is that a thing that can help reduce some of that workload on them? Technology, the records management system, what ways and what things can be done, and let empower the officers and the firefighters. And number 3 is the fire chief and the CEO clerk should develop a succession plan in anticipation of the fire chief's eventual retirement. The plan should outline which duties will be reassigned to other departments or other municipal personnel. So basically, talk about what it's going to look like in that time frame, and then make a plan for it. And again, we really think what a tremendous opportunity that you have. And it's similar to the fire station. It's similar to everything. This should be a strategic plan that you get ready for the future, because these things are going to come. So with that, Madam Mayor, that's my presentation. And of course, any questions, more than happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Terry. That was very comprehensive and very, very well done. And I knew it would be after reading the draft report. So wonderful. Before I open it up to council, I will just make just a quick comment regarding the succession plan. Council has certainly, we've had this on our mind for quite some time, not only with regards to the fire chief's position, but also with many of our employees. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have human resources, and we have listed an organizational review and update to job descriptions, and to hire an outside consultant to do just that, is to review, to do this type of review for our term. So it's listed in our strategic plan, in our overall strategic plan. So it's definitely on our radar and listed as a priority of this council, because many of our employees are approaching retirement age, as is the norm at this workforce. So definitely a concern, but I'm really glad that you highlighted it. But I do have a number of other questions, but before I ask my other questions, I'll open it up to to other members of council, and I'll start here at the end with Councillor Hoffman. Do you have any questions or comments for Terry?
Well, I said to you this at the last fire meeting we had was, what do you think about using retirees as trainers? You know, instead of, because we have to send our guys away and it costs big bucks. If we had guys in the force that have the training, if they could train our firefighters, and we'd save some money.
Madam Mayor, so I think it just doesn't stop at training. I think volunteer services across the country, not just the province, need to be more creative. So what can we do with other members of our community, with retired firefighters or officers? I mean, yes, you have a bylaw and you also have criteria, provincial criteria certification that they'd have to have, obviously. But you know, what is, I know a particular department that's, you know, now brings somebody in one day a month to do the maintenance on the equipment for them. Like, they've kind of thought outside. We used to say that, we used to think that every firefighter that come through the door had to do the whole thing. And I'm not suggesting this is where you need to go, but some departments are saying, you know what, we're going to hire people that are just going to do the medical calls. We're going to hire people that are just going to drive tanker truck. Some departments are using municipal employees that if there's a large fire, the roads people come in and drive the tankers type of idea. And again, I'm not suggesting you need to go down to those, but I think you're right, Councillor, there needs to be some creativity to be able to make the volunteer service survive, you know, for now and for the future, because the next step is costly for you. So I agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Hoffman. Councillor Cannon, do you have any comments, questions?
Hi, Terry. I loved the review. I mean, I learned so much that I didn't know. It's surprising how much we don't know about the fire department. I didn't know about the training center. Like, kudos. What a way to come up with, you know, how to train the guys. Like, but it would have been nice to know. So communication is going to have to open up a lot in the future, because we can't help the fire department if we don't know. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. And I'll just correct you, the people on the firefighters, because we have both men and women. Councillor Rapato?
You did an excellent job. As a former fireman and a citizen of the town, it's happy to hear that the department is doing such a highly dedicated job. It's a real nice evening.
Councillor Hatfield?
I can go through really quick, Terry. When I read the report, I thought, oh my goodness, what don't I understand? And I'm really glad that you went through it point by point. You know how I feel about our fire chief. I find he's overworked. So are you saying to us our legacy and grandfathering is all in place? Like, we don't have to do anything for that, it's there?
So today's current, you have everybody is grandfathered, certified, or legacied. So you can provide the service that you've approved. If the chief didn't legacy the other 9 members, you wouldn't be able to do interior structure firefighting or auto extrication services today. So what we're recommending is those 9 people, now it buys you some time to work towards getting them certified.
Okay.
So that it's basically, you would have had to stop those services today. You wouldn't have enough people could do that. So that's allowed them to do that. And now you've got the 2 years to try to get them to that point. And the other good thing is, like, with the recruits, they're coming in under those standards. They have to, right? So they're going to come in and understand. So eventually certification is going to be you're not going to be discussing it like we are, like, you know, by 2026.
I really appreciate that, because I had a hard time understanding that.
Well, you know, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, I got to tell you, it tipped me a little bit too. And in fact, we had some discussions with the fire marshal's office even to understand the legacy, because it came out a little bit different. But yeah, it's a good program and it allows you to continue services.
Yeah, but you're training these guys, like they're grandfathered, but the training is going to be continuous. So that's how, yeah, okay.
That means.
Now, when you said getting all this stuff on a computer, how far back do you go?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I was the fire chief, I'd start today. You have the records. Right? I wouldn't put the burden on anybody to start going back. And in fact, when the department is in, when we put in our first records management system, that's exactly what we did. We said July 1st, whatever the date, July 1st.
Oh,
Today we're going to flip over to using technology.
yeah.
I'm not suggesting that you take all the records you have there and go back and put them all in there. Start at whatever day, start that day, and that's your new go forward.
Oh, good. I understand that. And Terry, thank you very much, because I really enjoyed it.
So as I mentioned, Terry, I do have a few questions, but I just wanted to make an initial comment. While I appreciate your report, and I think that it was really well delivered, I wanted to make a comment and a compliment to our fire chief, because, the report is a reflection of all the great work that our fire chief has done. So, really big hats off to Mr. Sabourin for the work that he has done, because it's not an easy job, and I know that it's one that comes often with a lot of criticism and a lot of misunderstanding. So this is definitely an eye-opener, but I'm very thankful to Mr. Sabourin for keeping our community safe and providing leadership to our fire team. So we'll start there. But one thing that I did notice is that on all of 46 of the recommendations, all or most are showing an immediate or short-term timeline. So in the spirit of setting up our fire chief for success in the future, is there any way that we can really give a more realistic timeline to those? Because in my opinion, while all are important, not all can be done within a 0 to 3 month timeline or immediately.
Great observation, Madam Mayor, and I agree with you. And I would certainly, one of the things I've said both to the chief, the CEO, that our company isn't designed that this is my last time here and we go away and thank you very much for your check type of idea. We're engaged in your community now. I told the mayor that we have there's a piece of my heart now in Wawa for the time and all the time I spent here and some of the time I spent north of here in White River as well too. But so what I would propose that happens next is the chief working with the advisory committee, working with the deputy chief, working with the CEO, now takes these recommendations and maybe just puts them on an Excel or charts them and starts to look at the realistic. It's easy for us to say that's an immediate and really, because we think that's important, but you also got to weigh that against all the other municipal programs that are going on. So I would suggest that be the next step, is plot it all out and then say, you know what, we're going to knock these 4 off this year. We can do that. And we're going to knock the next 2 off. So you're not bound. There's no legislation that binds you. There's no adopting this document that binds you by the times that we've put in there. And what I would offer is that we would stay engaged and participate in that process and help them prioritize if they choose. As part of being the authors of the document, we do that quite often. Jump on a meeting and say, okay, or come to a fire service. They look at, these are the ones that we should, we recommend, or let's look at them. And it's your staff that live this every day that can say, you know what, with all the stuff going on this year, we can only do 7 of these. Or you know what, so many of these are really administrative, and it's a matter of creating some bylaws and some policies. We can get those whipped off pretty quick, right? So we can do 4 or 5 of them. So you're not bound. The first fire master plan I was involved with, by the time I retired in 2016, it would have been in place for 4 years, and there was 5 recommendations that weren't done. We didn't get to them. And then a new fire master plan came in and things had changed. And so yeah, you're not bound by that. But again, it's to have that vision, right? That's what we're hoping to do.
Absolutely. My second question, and then I'll wrap it up. And this might even be more directed at our CAO and our treasurer, but is it reasonable to plan for or to apply for an NOHFC intern that can really assist with bylaw redevelopment or the administrative portion that might be outside of the scope of work for of our fire chief?
Certainly we'll examine it, but in our discussions with NOHFC and the way they've structured the intern program, it's administrative work is not the goal of the program. But certainly it's a great recommendation, Mayor, and we'll pursue that. We also, though, feel that the existing staff has the capacity to add to their daily workload the things that we can help on an administrative level with things like the records management, creating bylaws, those things we certainly have staff capacity to do. But your point's well taken, and we will continue to look for ways that we can access more support and any internships that might be available to support the fire department.
Excellent. Well, there's no other questions for me this evening. Once again, thank you very much for all your hard work, and thank you very much to the fire chief and CAO, Fire Advisory Committee, everybody who participated in pulling this report together. It was a great job and well received by council. So we'll call that to an end to the delegation and presentation. I have already presented Terry with a goose pin, thanking him for coming. So didn't want to divert too much from our tradition that we've been trying to put together. We have a little bit of the formal meeting that we will continue to stick to the agenda. So I'll ask everybody to be patient as we move through. Item number 5, announcements and giving of notice. Is there any announcements from council? Seeing none, we will move on to new business. 6.1.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by, I can't read the handwriting, excuse me, I will check. Apologies, Mayor. Start over. Moved by Councillor Cannon, second by Councillor Hoffman. Whereas the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality Wawa has identified the need to have a fire services review completed for its volunteer fire department, and whereas in 2023, the Municipality Wawa contracted the Lumex Group to develop a fire services review to identify and evaluate Wawa's current and anticipated fire protection needs and services, and whereas the Lumex Group met with stakeholders from Wawa and the Wawa Volunteer Fire Department to gain firsthand insights about the community and the department's operations. And whereas the Lumex Group completed a fire service review that assessed the fire protection services that Wawa currently receives, provided data that Wawa can use to make informed decisions about the levels of fire services to be provided by the municipality to keep residents and firefighters safe. And the study makes recommendations to improve fire services currently delivered in the municipality of Wawa that address its fire protection needs adequately and cost effectively. Therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the Municipality of Wawa does hereby receive and accept the Wawa Fire Services Review Report prepared by the Lumex Group.
All in favor? Carried. There are no bylaws, closed session, or business arising from the closed session, so we will move to adjourn.
Moved by Councillor Pato, seconded by Councillor Hatfield. Resolved that the meeting close at 8:08 p.m.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you everyone for your hard work tonight. Have a great evening.